Kamala Harris is back, dude. She's got this brand new book. She's on a book tour. She's doing what she does best and yelling at protesters. Oh, I love it, man. After about 9 months of what I think was some serious self-reflection about what happened last year, Kamala Harris is back to make millions of dollars off of what I think is probably one of the most tone-deaf books I've ever read. You can tell that this is the real book because of the quotes in the first page. I got loyalty, royalty inside my DNA. I was born like this. That's not relevant to the book at all. I don't know why she picked that quote. Let me just say right off the bat, I'll fully admit, it's kind of hard for me to read this book from like a objective point of view. This book is the most significant thing that Kamala Harris has done since she left office, and I think that's like very telling of her character, if you ask me. As you can probably tell, I'm not really the biggest Kamala Harris fan, but I did read this book hoping to see at least some sort of like reflection on why she felt that she lost the election. I was hoping to see if there would be like any sort of like responsibility being taken or accountability being taken here in this book, and I got none of that. The book itself is literally named after an excuse, which also, side note, if you find yourself forgetting how many days she had to run this election while you're reading the book, don't worry, she'll definitely remind you quite a lot. After seeing Kamala's first public interview post-election on Colbert, I was pretty underwhelmed by the amount of substance that she kind of offered to the conversation about what was going on in this country. Like, again, I don't really expect much from her, but even then I'm like underwhelmed by it. Then early copies of this book started making the rounds to journalists, and they started kind of leaking some passages from this book that I found to be quite interesting. Some of them went viral. One example, of course, is like when she talked about she didn't pick Pete Buttigieg as her running mate because he was gay. You know, that's not exactly what she says, but that's like basically what she says. It boils down to that. So then I was like, all right, you know, I gotta read this book, man. And to be fully transparent with you, I read it with the intention of wanting to make this video. Right off the bat, Kamala Harris comes across as like very like egotistical and narrow-minded in this book, which I guess that's like every politician is kind of like that. It's very interesting because like we're all on the same page that she lost, right? She lost this election. Some of the times she like writes in this book as if she like didn't lose. On the day that Biden drops out, Harris recalls her time about being on the phone for like 8 hours with like different like governors and like congressmen, all these different political leaders trying to get their endorsement. And by doing this, she essentially takes down the idea of having any sort of mini primary going into the 2024 election. And this is not just me interpreting it that way. That is like literally like what she says in her book. She fully admits that like if she was on the phone with someone and they suggested having a mini primary, she shot it down immediately. Nancy Pelosi has said it publicly that there should have been a mini primary, and according to Kamala's book, Nancy also told Kamala privately that there should have been some primary. Kamala responds by writing, "If they thought that I was down with a mini primary or some other half-baked procedure, I was quick to disabuse them." And then she continues to write that this is the process. If anyone wants to challenge me, they're welcome to jump in, but I intend to earn the support of the majority of the delegates as I'm doing right now. Of course, Biden's like immediate dropout and endorsement kind of played into this as well. When she writes about this day and like writes about the idea of like shooting down a mini primary, she writes it in a way that makes it seem like this was the best decision because she won, but she obviously she didn't win. To write about this event of you killing a primary process with no other reflection than just how long would it have taken to do a mini primary, it comes across the wrong way to me. Because while yes, questioning how long it would take is like a valid concern, but also you're not gonna reflect on anything other than, yeah, it would have taken some time. You know, you're not gonna like say like, you know, in hindsight, maybe there should have been more of a little bit of a process. Maybe there should have been, there could have been another candidate that would have actually won. But of course, there's no self-awareness in this issue. Kamala like fully believes that she was the person for this job. Like she 100% fully admits that she was the only person that was qualified to beat Donald Trump, which clearly she wasn't. She literally writes this. She says, "I knew I was the candidate in the strongest position to win, the most qualified and ready." There's even a clip of her on her book tour like saying something along these lines. I just find it like incredibly funny to make these statements after losing. Like you lost the election and you still think you were the most qualified person to lose the Well, that was a Freudian slip. In the book, she kind of explains her reasoning as to why she thinks she's like the most qualified person, highest name recognition, and a powerful donor base. But the thing that stuck out to me the most was that she was the only person who would preserve Joe Biden's legacy. It's very interesting throughout this book. She has this very interesting relationship with Joe Biden, I guess, because she has this like idea in her head that she needs to be some sort of messenger for Joe Biden to like talk about like how good he was as a president. But she also like is completely oblivious of the fact that like people did not like Joe Biden. She writes in her book that at the beginning of her campaign, she would spend most of her speeches praising Joe Biden, and she only stopped after some staffer was like, dude, you gotta stop fucking talking about Joe Biden. She said, over the course of 107 days, I became increasingly aware that people wanted to know that there was a separation, and that was a big issue for them. I just didn't realize how big. Like, bro, what were you paying attention to? You thought everyone was just down with this 90-year-old dude? And she defends him like profusely. Like, obviously there was that disastrous debate performance. She knows like that it looked bad, but she was like, you know, I've seen him way better than this. This was like the worst that I've seen him. I don't know what happened that night. There's like moments where she's like, oh fuck, I wish I wrote this quote down because it's really funny. But she was like, on Joe Biden's worst days, he's still way smarter than Donald Trump. that doesn't provide anything for right now. That doesn't add to the conversation in any meaningful way. It's fascinating to see her defend Joe Biden so much in this book because at least to her, Joe Biden comes off as like super narcissistic. There's like multiple moments in this book where she's like annoyed with Joe Biden because Joe Biden seems to only care about himself, which I guess is kind of true. Joe Biden kind of does only care about himself. That's kind of part of the reason why we're in this situation with Donald Trump being president again is because Joe Biden is so narcissistic. A lot of the times she'll write about Joe Biden and it seems like Joe Biden just like is very selfish, very narcissistic, doesn't really care about anything but himself. And this seems to like Kamala Harris, she seems to be hurt by this on like a deeper level. Like there's a couple of times where she talks about like Joe Biden's speeches during the campaign and how like Joe Biden would just go off talking about himself. She says during the Democratic National Convention, Joe Biden would just go like, he just like went on and on about himself during his hour-long speech. It was a legacy speech for him, not an argument for me. And he was entitled to it, but if I waited for some personal stories about working with me and what qualities he had seen that led him to endorse me, they weren't there. She seems like she's like a little hurt by it. There's also a moment that she writes about in this book where Joe Biden calls her before the debate to like wish her luck, and this is like right before she walks out on the debate stage, wishes her luck, and then goes like, hey, you know, my brother, he heard from some power brokers that like you were talking shit on me. And they're not going to support you anymore because you were talking shit on me. Were you talking shit on me? And she's like, what? I don't know what you're talking about, dude. I got to go debate Donald Trump. She's like very annoyed with him in that moment, but yet she like still fucking defends Joe Biden with her life. I like, sure, it kind of makes sense. She's a part of like the administration. Like there's things that like they did together that she would want to defend, but also it's like also kind of like a read the room situation too. Specifically, you know, she of course brings up the infamous question on The View where one of the hosts asked, is there anything that you would do differently from Joe Biden? And like she was just like basically like, nah man, Joe Biden, he was a chill motherfucker. This was like a big moment during the campaign where like everyone's like, damn dude, what a blunder, what a shitty way to answer that question. And this was like kind of a moment in the book too where she kind of like, this is when she realized on the campaign trail that people did not like Joe Biden. She has some sort of like moment of self-reflection where she's like, yeah, I definitely answered that question the wrong way. But when she's like thinking about, when she's writing about like what she would have said differently, she does her famous I would appoint a Republican to the cabinet thing. Like that's the only difference between her and Joe Biden is that she just likes Republicans like a little bit more than Joe Biden. This is another thing too that I find very strange for her to like double down on after the election. She writes this in retrospect as like, oh, this is a winning answer. It's weird because like voter data from the election shows that there is like absolutely no right-wing swing towards Kamala Harris. I don't know why she's like still like so into this idea of like, yeah man, I'm working with Republicans. And there's like kind of like this like kind of political obliviousness throughout the entire book. She mentions campaigning with Liz Cheney. She says specifically in the book that she campaigned with Liz Cheney so she can like bring Republicans into her tent. And she writes about how like she was mad about how much media attention that her campaigning with Liz Cheney got. And it's like, yeah, dude, just because that was a bad fucking idea. And I don't know why you're still defending it. She's like, yeah, dude, I'm glad I did that. That was awesome. But also, I hate that people talked about it. She writes about how she lost the male vote, or like the young male vote. Voters in like the 18 to 22-ish range that are young and lonely, and they're watching XQC or something. This was a moment of the book that I was reading it and I was like, okay, you're onto something here. She's being like, you know, very sympathetic towards these young voters. She writes, these people came of age during COVID, unnaturally isolated, their lives lonely when they should have been at their most social. And then she later writes that the voices that fill the void belong to Andrew Tate, Myron Gaines, and others. I'm like, she's not wrong. Like, it's like, I'm 23, so it's like I obviously have seen this happen in my real life. But then she goes on to talk about how like some polling indicated that for these young male voters, their top issue was the economy. And she doubles down on her fucking, she doubles down on her economic policies that like clearly didn't work because she clearly lost the young male vote. So she's like, dude, I was gonna give you tax credits for a new down payment for a home. I wasn't a big fan of her economic tax credit policies because it's like, I don't think it fixed like the root cause of the issue. You know, a home in my state, a down payment, the average down payment is $75,000. A $25,000 tax credit, yeah, it sounds nice, but it's like, where am I getting 75 grand from to buy a home? And so for her to be like, yeah, you know, you young male voters that all voted for Donald Trump because he was promising you something that I wasn't, you just don't understand what I was saying. Like, she said in 107 days I didn't have enough time to show how much more I would do to help them than Trump ever would. And you know, throughout the whole book, Kamala Harris comes across as like very entitled. There's no other way to say it, dude. She just comes across as like super entitled. Not only does she come across as entitled like when it pertains to like being entitled to the nomination itself, but she's like, there's also kind of these moments where it's like, it sounds like she feels like she's entitled to votes. It's funny because like the same night that I finished reading this book, I saw this clip from her book tour.
And if you want to talk about legacy, let's talk about the legacy of mass deportation of people not voting and Donald Trump.
What a banging message. That's a winning message right there, dude. It's your fault. Not my fault, your fault, because you didn't vote for me. I am 100% against blaming the voter. I see a lot of this on Twitter from, you know, liberals and even some leftists that are like, you know, they kind of like laugh at people that voted for Donald Trump and they laugh at their misfortune and they go like, well, you should have voted the other way. You know, it's like these soybean farmers that aren't going to be able to sell their product because, you know, Trump's fucking them economically. And people are like, yeah, dude, fuck it, I have no sympathy for these guys. They voted for the Trump. It's like, all right, that's not a productive way to have a conversation. You know, that doesn't do anything. So I don't like that. But then also, I don't like this idea of like blaming the voter because it absolves any responsibility towards the losing party, you know? Especially if if a politician comes out and blames the voter for losing, there's no room for like growth from the party or the politician. You know, they're not gonna like look at this and be like, yeah, but what we're doing was obviously wrong. They look at it and they go, you were wrong, not me. It's Kamala Harris's responsibility to get people to vote for her. It's not our responsibility to vote for her. Before I go any further too, I should probably say that I did vote for her. I know there might be some libs in the comment that is gonna yell at me for not voting for Kamala Harris. I voted for Kamala Harris. This clip is a response to someone who was protesting Kamala Harris due to her complicity and genocide of the Palestinian people that was going on during her time as vice president. And is, you know, quite frankly, even though there's like I guess a little bit of hope, I'm not entirely hopeful of the fact that it is over. Kamala Harris has like this particular distaste towards people that are pro-Palestinian protesters because this is an issue that came up a lot during the election. There are multiple times where she mentions it in her books of like people that would like protest at her campaign stops. And every single time she writes about it, she like feels like she's like annoyed. She's like, yeah, I mean, it's their First Amendment right, but it's like also, I just wish they knew how much I was doing to stop this. It's like, okay, well, it's like, you're not, I don't really believe you. And also, there was not really a whole lot of reflection on her end of like why these people were there to begin with or where they drew the line. Like literally the only reflection that she had on this was like, I just wish they knew if they could walk a day in my shoes. Israel was conducting a genocide, and the person who was running to be president of the United States was part of the administration that was funding the genocide. This is not a minority opinion, by the way. This is like something that is like widely agreed upon. Even the UN has come out and they're like, yeah, dude, this is a fucking genocide. So while this was going on during her time as vice president and her time as campaigning as president, she failed to address this glaring issue properly. And there's been some polling that kind of suggests that this is something that, you know, led to her downfall in some sort of way. And early on in the book, this is what like really fucking irks me. There's like a moment where she mentions this very early on in the book that like really got me frustrated. And honestly, probably the main reason why I'm making this video. She quotes some of the protesters that were at one of her first campaign stops. Kamala, you can't hide. We won't vote for genocide. And then immediately after she writes, the threat to withhold their vote got to me. It felt reckless. So that's the moment, right? That's where you go, oh, so you did feel entitled to people's votes. Like you did feel like you deserved their votes. Here's a group of people that are clearly drawing a line at something that is known as like the crime of all crimes. And then she's just sitting here and going like, damn, man, like, you won't vote for that? That's like insane, right? Like I'm not alone in my thinking there. Like that's an insane thing to write in her book. She also goes on to write, why weren't they protesting at Trump rallies, I wondered? Which is also a really funny thing to say because it's not like Trump was the vice president at the time. It's like, dude, you were the vice president. That's why they were at your rallies protesting your policies that were enabling this genocide. And now there's like kind of this group of people that are like we shouldn't be getting mad at Kamala Harris anymore. You know, there's nothing she could do anymore. It's like George Bush, right? George Bush got out of office. It's like, all right, just let him paint, man. Kamala Harris during this book, like I've mentioned, has had no moment of like self-reflection. But what is fascinating is that there's multiple moments in this book where Kamala Harris, she says, I told you so, which is fucking awesome, dude. She's like, I predicted all of this. And it's like, cool, dude. It's like, sure, man. Lots of people did. It just pisses me off. It just really irks me, man. It's like, that's like one of the reasons why I think people feel so disenfranchised by the Democratic Party is because they're a bunch of like stuck up fucking snobs that like think they know all the shit. Like they think they know everything, then they're all entitled to your fucking vote. And that's like, if you don't vote for me, you're the problem, dude. She mentions in her book that 1/3 of the country voted for her, 1/3 of the country voted for Donald Trump, and 1/3 of the country didn't vote at all. And she goes, 2/3 of the country didn't pick this man or his agenda. But then it's also like, yeah, dude, 2/3 of the country didn't pick you either. So it's like, what point are you trying to prove there? The entirety of the book comes down to her saying that, yeah, man, I just didn't have enough time to run, which I think is a misunderstanding of like what happened. It's a complete misunderstanding. Cause like, dude, the popular vote was in a 1.5% margin. Like most swing states were within 2 points of each other. I don't think the timing was the issue. I think you and your policies were the issue. Like she mentions in the book, she's like, yeah, the entire time polling was neck and neck and I had no idea how to get ahead of each other. It's like, okay, dude, in 107 days, you knew that polling was neck and neck and you still didn't like do anything to like fix it. If you were halfway through the election polling, you know, 50-50 with Donald Trump, and by the end of the election, you still lost 50-50 basically to Donald Trump, the timing wasn't the issue, dude. I don't know, man. Quite frankly, I just bought the book and read it and I didn't want it to be a waste of time, so that's why I made this video.